What's going on, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Agit Prop, short for agitative propaganda. I'm your host, Hasan Piker, coming to you live from the den of sin, the epicenter of cultural imperialism. I'm, of course, referring to sunny California, Los Angeles. We have an awesome show ready for you guys today. I spent a long time with Dan, our producer Dan, which you will get to see actually in person for once. All this past weekend and for hours late into the night last night to put together, because it's a jam-packed back-to-back show, two very special guests. At 12:30, I'll be joined by Michael Brooks of the Michael Brooks Show and also the Majority Report. You guys might be familiar with him because he is also a professional impressionist. We're gonna have an impression off. Later, we're going to talk about Lula, his favorite topic, of course, and Exiting the Vampire Castle by Mark Fisher, and why at a time when right-wing radicalization is happening all around the world and right-wing fascist governments are propping up left and right, we on the left, unfortunately, have to kind of let go of some forms of purity testing, especially bourgeois purity testing, in an effort to organize more effectively. We're also going to be talking about the Bernie Sanders criminal justice plan and how MSNBC covered it and how ridiculous it was. I'm going to be malding a little bit for the TYT fans. Malding means I'm mad and balding. That's a Twitch meme. If you want to find out more about those Twitch memes, you go to twitch.tv/Hasanabi, where I'm live every day after 4 p.m. Pacific. Now, we're also going to be talking about in the first hour why anti-fascism is good. I'm going to get to that briefly, but before that, I'm going to do a quick plug about the second hour, which is behind a paywall, but that is going to be with Mehdi Hasan, one of my favorite journalists, favorite commentators on the planet, a person I share a name with. He is the better Hasan. I'm going to be talking to him about Islam, his personal transformation from being a relatively more conservative Muslim to a progressive Muslim, and how neoliberal thinkers and neoliberal pundits like Bill Maher and Sam Harris routinely engage in Islamophobia, and how their ridiculous criticism of Islam is monolithic, and how that actually impacts and how that plays into the hands of Muslim fundamentalists and extremists in different parts of the world. So a lot of stuff to cover. We're finally going to talk about Hong Kong protests as well. So if there are any tankies in the audience right now, I suggest you tune out from that portion, because I will say that the Hong Kong protests are good, and that I don't think that police violence is a good thing, even if it's being done at the interest of a supposedly communist nation. So let's just get started, okay? So, Antifa, good. Every little thing that you might want to know about anti-fascism will hopefully be explained to you in the next 15 minutes. Now, ahead of the far-right rally that was being conducted or being organized in Portland, Donald Trump tweeted out a warning to Antifa, where he did not address the members of the alt-right gathering at the Portland rally, but he did say he's considering designating Antifa an organization of terror. Now, this is something that liberals and conservatives alike kind of agree on, where they think anti-fascism is bad, Antifa is bad. I'm going to tell you right now, it's not, okay? It's not bad, it's good. First and foremost, though, let's take a look at the rally really quickly.
We heard some violent Nazi chuds. We're going to get together in the park because they like to make YouTube videos of themselves looking really tough. And we thought, how tough can they look if you got unicorns in the background and banana suits? So that's why my wife, Eunice Unicorn, and me, Edwin Unicorn, came down. So
that was the Antifa CEO / president, Edwin Unicorn. I'm of course joking, okay? Let's just get started. All right, so anti-fascism is an ideology. It's a movement, it's an action, it's not a membership, it's not an organization, there's no organizational structure, there's no hierarchy, you can't join Antifa, you can't be the CEO of Antifa. So whenever someone says that like they are a part of Antifa, or they're a part of a club, or they're a member of Antifa, know that they're probably either lying to you or trolling, or they're a right-wing disinformation agent. But the reason why I started off with Edwin Unicorn there is because Antifa is not just about the black bloc. It's not just about mass protesters going up to Donald Trump supporters and beating them with bike locks or whatever, despite how hard conservative media tries to portray it in that fashion, okay? It's just about opposing fascism and doing whatever is necessary to oppose fascism. Now, Some forms of Antifa are just like the unicorn guy that I showed you, that just want to simply protest against and counter-organize against fascist organizing in different areas. There are other forms of anti-fascist protests that also take a more militant approach that do not exclude violence. So, that doesn't mean that like violence is a part of their ideology, or that doesn't mean that they are an inherently violent group. It just means that if push comes to shove, in an effort to defend their own communities, some members of Antifa or some anti-fascist organizers will not rule out potential violence. But having said that, isn't it rather suspicious that whenever we talk about violent political ideologies, we always say left wing is so violent, they're throwing milkshakes, they have cement in their milkshakes, and it's crazy, and they're punching Trump supporters, and it's just a bunch of people filling up their diapers, freaking out. I'm of course referencing like Jake Tapper and whatnot. And yet, for some weird reason, white supremacist terror has a lot more numbers on the board. In 2019, for example, domestic extremists killed at least 50 people in the United States. 2019 was the 4th deadliest year on record for domestic extremist-related killings since 1970. The extremist-related murders in 2018 were overwhelmingly, and this might shock you, linked to right-wing extremists. Every one of the perpetrators had ties to at least one right-wing extremist movement, although one had recently switched to supporting Islamist extremism. So, really weird, really suspicious that, you have 0 kills on the one hand as far as anti-fascists go, and then you have a bunch of kills on the other hand. All of the kills, as a matter of fact, with the exception of one, when it comes to right-wing, far-right, anti-government extremism. Really weird that the overwhelming focus, however, is almost always on how violent Antifa is, and they constantly talk about potential violence that might come later down the line. Why are we talking about potential violence that might come later down the line when we already have real violence linked to white supremacist domestic terror, like the case of El Paso? Really strange. Anyway, so what is anti-fascism? Let's talk about that. So anti-fascism is an ideology that opposes fascism and tries to fight back against the spreading of fascist ideology. Like I mentioned already, it is an action, it's not an organization, there's no membership, and it's decentralized and only exists when fascism exists. Contrary to popular boomer memes, like this one that focuses exclusively on the fact that people are wearing masks, Antifa doesn't even always wear masks. For example, in the latest counter-protest that we're gonna take a look at against Patriot Prayer in Portland, anti-fascist organization featured trade unions. They featured a group of colorful banana suit wearing people. They also featured this unicorn guy that we mentioned earlier. But then there was also the mask wearing black bloc. Now this is the most popular part of anti-fascism, or the most heavily popularized part of anti-fascism, even though they make up a small number of anti-fascists that are organizing at any given place. The example that I want to show you guys in the B-roll is the black bloc surrounding the famous Proud Boy who is there specifically to agitate. And the Proud Boy I'm of course referring to is Alan Swinney. So that behemoth right there is Alan Swinney, and if you can look closely, there are people around him that are ensuring that Alan Swinney does not present a threat to the other peaceful counter-protesters there. And that's precisely the reason that they're there. They're not there to like beat up Alan Swinney specifically, but they're there to ensure that Alan Swinney does not beat anyone else up. Now, it's more often than not, it's a defensive stance that they take around actual violent white supremacists to ensure protection to counter-protesters. Also, a lot of fascists will purposely agitate, like the example that I just used, and they'll walk into crowds full of anti-fascist counter-protesters, they'll taunt them, they'll try to scare them, they'll try to shove them and push them around, knowing full well that the police will end up protecting them. And if you think I'm lying, here are some Proud Boy chats that were leaked showing us how they use violence. Now, there is a Huffington Post article that discusses how members are talking about how they might use violence against the commies they'll meet in the streets, which police officers might be sympathetic to them, how they'll raise funding to fly out their long-distance compatriots, and how they'll bait protesters into throwing the first punch so that they can claim self-defense. But also, if you look at the text message exchanges that were leaked to Huffington Post, you'll realize that they're not necessarily interested in a peaceful confrontation. They're not necessarily interested in free speech, and that this is precisely why there is a necessity for a more militant defense force that will protect the anti-fascist protesters, because they know that historically police have oftentimes sided with the fascist protesters. If you look at the Canal Street riots, for example, or if you look at like the Swedish anti-fascist protests, more often than not, historically, the police officers are usually defending the fascists against the counter-fascist protesters. This happened in Charlottesville as well, most famously, where Heather Heyer, an anti-fascist protester, was killed by James Fields, a neo-Nazi who drove thousands of miles to Charlottesville to go and murder as many commies as he possibly could. Now, what's also interesting, aside from the fact that the prominent Proud Boys that I just showed you were planning assaults, is that even the person who organized the event, Joe Biggs, was recently banned from Twitter for making death threats and was reportedly visited by the FBI agents asking about his violent postings. Biggs' social media activity included a video showing off a spiked bat he said he was bringing and a post saying he was setting up a torture chamber in his home. There was a famous video that was aired on Fox that Andy Ngo distributed. There was a hammer that was highlighted and shown as being thrown by an Antifa protester at a Proud Boy. But if you look at the full video of the hammer incident, however, it shows that it was a member of the American Guard who brought the weapon to the rally. The hammer was then taken by an Antifa protester after an American Guard member attempted to bludgeon them with it during a fight outside of the American Guard bus. Now, you might be asking, what is the American Guard, Hasan? That's crazy. Oh, turns out, if you look at ADL reports, the American Guard was an offshoot of the Sons of Odin white supremacist group. So, you know, those guys there that most people are defending without realizing that they're defending are white supremacists who brought hammers. I wonder why they brought hammers to a peaceful demonstration. I wonder why a white nationalist group would bring hammers to a peaceful demonstration. It almost feels like their intentions are not as pure as these stupid liberals and dishonest conservatives make it seem out to be, okay? Anyway, let's keep going. So fascism is a longer conversation that we can get into. The American Guard is a good example of this, and crypto fascism is absolutely a conversation that we're going to get into because it requires like a longer, more comprehensive approach where I will describe to you why people hide that they're fascists or why people hide that they're racist, because they know that if you're outed as a Nazi, then even liberals will no longer take you seriously. Although that conversation is changing in in recent years. But fascism is a form of radical authoritarian right-wing ultranationalism which focuses on power, militarism, and the control for the benefit of an in-group. This in-group, out-group dynamic is incredibly important for fascism because that is the significant difference between anti-fascism and fascism. Anti-fascists are upset at people who want to organize, fascists who want to organize in their communities, because fascism always will lead to violence. Whereas if you want to stop anti-fascism from happening, anti-fascist organization from happening, you just have a very simple choice. Don't be a fascist. Stop being a fascist. Stop going to fascist demonstrations. Stop being a part of the very fine people on both sides if one of the sides is screaming blood and soil, or if one of the sides is bringing bats and hammers to beat up people that in a town that they don't even live in. Don't forget, a lot of times the fascists are organizing. They have membership structures in their organizations. They are linked back to like white supremacist murderers. Sons of Odin is a perfect example, or the American Guard is a perfect example, which has members linked to 9 kills, like 9 hate crimes that ended up in murders in recent years. So there is an element of choice there. You can choose not to be a fascist, but for a fascist, their ultimate goal is the wholesale eradication of certain subsects of the population. You can't choose not to be Jewish. You can't choose not to be gay. You can't choose not to be black, but you can choose not to be a racist dingus. This is the main difference between fascism and anti-fascism. And the reason why I want to mention this, even though it sounds so simple, is because a lot of people end up conflating the terms, and a lot of liberals even start saying stuff like anti-fascism is the real fascism. And that is playing into the hands of the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists, the white nationalists, the white identitarians, the numerous different rebrands that you hear for the same old violent ideologies. Stop playing into the hands of fascists, stop defending fascists, and admit that anti-fascism is good, and understand that there might be certain elements in fascist mobilization, which I will talk about right now, that can end up being violent, but violence is a part of all politics. What upsets you or what offends you when we talk about violence is not necessarily the bike lock hitting the head of a white nationalist or whatever, but it's actually the fact that that violence is outside of the norm. Now consider the Portland protests. There were many different violent arrests in the hands of the police. The police also use long-range acoustic devices, which were considered for war zones originally. These are military surplus equipment that the Portland police is freely using on citizens. That's violence. That is state violence. But no one ever considers that to be violent behavior because it's not outside of the norm. So oftentimes what you consider to be violent behavior or violent actions is just simply violent actions outside of what is expected. So another example of this I can use is the structural violence of poverty. The violence that if you don't go to work every single day, that violence that operates under capitalism, if you don't go to work every single day, you will not be able to put food on your table and you will potentially die. You won't be able to pay your rent and you'll get evicted. That is structural violence. State violence is another sort of violence that I just mentioned, when police officers will violently arrest you or use tear gas to disperse a crowd. That's still violence. It's just not the kind of violence that you would consider to be outside of the norm. So when you see a protester beating up an old man, for example, with a big beard on the Laura Ingraham show on Fox News, and you say, wow, these anti-fascists sure are crazy, right? You should probably look a little bit further into that situation. Because more often than not, that old man happens to be a 3%er, he happens to have an extended baton, and he happens to be walking directly towards an LGBT couple that he is interested in beating up. So, you know, I think in that circumstance, violently defending that couple or violently defending marginalized people in your communities from white supremacists doesn't seem all that unreasonable, especially when the state, the kind of violence that we are all accustomed to believing is normal, fails to defend those marginalized communities. This is precisely why a small subsection of anti-fascist organization will not rule out violence as a last resort. That doesn't mean that they are violent from the jump. Now, the other forms of anti-fascist organizing are, they normally happen before fascist demonstrations occur. If a fascist is coming to your town, like Richard Spencer, for example, a Nazi, is coming to your town and wants to organize a rally, what anti-fascists will do is try to subvert or derail or stop that organizing from happening by calling up hotels to make sure that these Nazis don't actually get a place to stay, or calling up the location in which this person can be speaking and telling them, this is ridiculous, this person's a Nazi, this person's ideas are inherently violent, and this will make this community less safe. So we want to stop this from happening. Those are all anti-fascist actions that you can take. As a matter of fact, that's the overwhelming majority of anti-fascist action. Anti-fascist action starts in derailing fascist organizations and ends at the final stage by using violence if necessary in a defensive way. Now, am I excusing all sorts of violence from the left? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Not all violence obviously is equal, and in chaotic moments like protests, some people might actually end up getting hurt on accident. I'm not excusing this behavior. This is precisely why anti-fascists are very careful with where and when they apply this sort of violence. Anyway, we talked about this, I think we covered this as best as possible. They're telling me to go into the next topic. So let's just move on to the next topic. But I just want to leave you off with this one very important note, okay? Stop being a sucker. Stop being fooled by right-wingers. Stop being too much of a liberal to realize that like all forms of political action inherently have violence associated with them. And it's just all dependent on who the victims of that violence are or why they are receiving that violence, okay? I'm not making like a moral qualifier on this. I'm just saying realize that all manner of politics is about a distribution of violence and distribution of wealth and power. All right, moving on. Speaking of distribution of violence and distribution of power, let's talk about Bernie Sanders' awesome criminal justice reform and how MSNBC covered it because they are ridiculous, okay? Let's go to the video.
Is this the right space that Democratic candidates need to be in, or they need to be a little bit more detailed or less detailed?
Voters are expecting candidates to come out with detailed plans. I think that's what we see from an expansive primary field. People want to see specifics. Look, if a candidate doesn't have a plan to fix something, it shows they don't really think it's a problem. They don't really care about it. So the fact that candidates are starting to come out with more detailed proposals is what people want to see. I think the fact that Sanders is coming out with a criminal justice plan actually pretty late in the way that he's running. I mean, he started running for president the day that Hillary Clinton lost.
Okay. Let me just, this made me so mad, dude. This made me so insanely mad when I watched it on my live stream the other day, because it comes with a pair of implications that really frustrate me, okay? One, there's an implication here that Sanders had no criminal justice reform plan when he ran last time, which is absolutely ridiculous. Two, comes along with an implication that Sanders hasn't been fighting for criminal justice reform throughout his entire time in office, and even before that. A guy who literally got arrested during the civil rights movement, as you can see here, like blaming this guy and saying, oh, he's only interested in criminal justice reform because it panders to the black community and he doesn't genuinely think that this is a good thing and that it's only a recent idea that Bernie Sanders has had, is so disgusting and so ahistorical that I don't know what to say. But unfortunately, this is the kind of commentary that is totally acceptable on MSNBC. Lastly, the implication that Sanders was supposed to launch a campaign as soon as Hillary Clinton lost. It's such an incredible stretch by any measure, by any sense of the word, any way of imagining this. Imagine if Bernie Sanders was like, I'm running for president as soon as Hillary Clinton lost. Like, how would the media respond to that? It would be ridiculous. But somehow, this conversation gets even worse. Let's take a look.
So the fact that it's taken him this long, especially considering the fact that one of the biggest knocks against him is that he really does not speak to communities of color and does not make any outreach to them, and really just frames all problem as economic rather than systemic and racial. So the fact that he's coming out with it this late, I think does say something about the fact that he's just trying to go after African-American voters in South Carolina because he's not running away with New Hampshire as he should.
Okay, look, this is the worst part of shallow liberal identity politics, okay? The implication here is that Bernie Sanders is just doing this to pander to the black vote, and that he doesn't genuinely believe in criminal justice reform, and it's not a part of his core beliefs. It's disgusting, okay? But it also gives the game away. I'm sorry that Bernie Sanders didn't go on Hot 97 and say, I love hot sauce on my Reuben sandwich, and that's why you should vote for me. It's like, sorry everybody. Sorry MSNBC that Bernie Sanders is not interested in doing that and has instead been fighting for criminal justice reform and civil rights for the black community for his entire career instead of doing that. Two, I absolutely hate that these issues are never covered as social justice. When it comes to economic issues, we never analyze it from the framework of social justice. It's so frustrating. Economic justice is real social justice, okay? I'm sorry that Bernie won't say this. I'm sorry, and I think that is a problem within the Bernie campaign. I think Bernie Sanders needs to communicate this a little bit better than he has so far, that economic issues impact the black community and brown community in disproportionately higher rates than the white working class or the white community. This is something that we absolutely need to change, because this liberal mentality is like, oh, if you're fighting for economic justice, that means you're not fighting for women. That means you're not fighting for marginalized communities. That is ridiculous, okay? That is ridiculous. We're talking about material inequalities, all right? So it's just really, really frustrating that a big chunk of the MSNBC watchers genuinely think that Hillary Clinton, who called African Americans super predators when backing her husband's and Joe Biden's actually insane, infamous crime bill that hurt the African American community, then can turn around and say, I got hot sauce in my bag, and everyone's like, all right, she's good, she's doing the great job. That's exactly what the black community needs. But then they're like, oh, Bernie Sanders, who railed against that same crime bill and has been a staunch advocate and a staunch ally for civil rights in this country his entire career, and even before that, has to pander specifically to the black community. It's so frustrating. Why is it that when a politician talks about criminal justice reform, we understand that it's about black and brown communities, right? We understand it because it disproportionately affects black and brown communities, right? Criminal justice reform. I get that. But why is it that when we talk about economic issues like healthcare or raising the minimum wage, it's never seen through a similar lens? It's incredibly frustrating that we still have this antiquated view over the working class, over economic issues, only impacting the white working class, the hard hat wearing white men who are working in construction yards, or these coal miners that are all white men. That's not true. The American working class, the American minimum wage workers are black, they're brown, they're young, and they're women. And guess what? That also happens to be Bernie Sanders' fan base and his voter base all around the country. So it is remarkable to me that we cannot make this distinction when it comes to raising the minimum wage or other economic issues, but we absolutely always understand when it's criminal justice reform, oh, it's the black and brown communities. Well, that's also unfortunate too, because there are plenty of poor white people that also get targeted by the negative consequences of how we criminalize poverty, which we will get to right now. Take a look at Bernie Sanders' criminal justice reform really quickly, okay? Number one, no profiteering. We're banning private prisons. We're making prison phone calls free of charge. It's a huge problem in the prison. It's a really predatory, privatized element of even public institutions. We're auditing commissaries for price gouging, incentivizing states to end police departments' reliance on fines and fees, removing the profit motive from the re-entry system, ending cash bail by financially rewarding states that do it. And the second part is accountability. Rescinding Jeff Sessions' guidance on consent decrees, oversight of federal funds used by police departments, end programs that provide military equipment to police forces, create a registry of police use of force and disreputable officers, ban facial recognition software for policing. This is incredibly important, not just the facial recognition part, but also trying to institute some form of accountability in policing in this country, which is an absolute necessity, okay? The third part is policing, establishing national standards for use of force, incredibly important. Require and fund officer training on implicit bias, banning civil assets forfeiture, another Joe Biden era expansion that came as he worked alongside segregationists to expand civil asset forfeitures, offloading low-level conflicts to social workers, EMTs, and mental health professionals. And finally, the miscellaneous parts are reaffirming the right to counsel, abolishing the death penalty, ending mandatory minimums, most importantly, legalizing marijuana and expunging past convictions, legalizing safe injection sites and needle exchanges, enacting a prisoner bill of rights, including a just transition. Whew. This is the radical transformation that this country absolutely needs. We house 25% of the world's incarcerated population. We treat prisoners like animals in this country, okay? And what's remarkable about Bernie Sanders' plan here is the fact that he is demonstrating such profound moral conviction, regardless of what the overwhelming attitude, the overwhelming negative attitude is towards prisoners in this country. And I think that's a beautiful thing, and that's exactly what we need from a leader. All right, we're gonna go to break, and when we come back, Michael Brooks is going to be on the line, and we're gonna have a conversation with him about exiting the vampire castle, among numerous other things. I'm very excited to have him on. You guys know I love Michael Brooks. I love Mehdi Hasan too, so stick around for that. What's going on? We're back, ladies and gentlemen. Joining me now is Michael Brooks, host of The Michael Brooks Show, which can be found on YouTube and Patreon, and also host of The Majority Report alongside Sam Cedar, and a frequent contributor to I-24 News. I'm really excited. The Tracksuit Bandit, Michael Brooks, welcome to Agit Prop.
Hey, man. Good to be with you. I'll wear a tracksuit next time.
Yeah, I'm shocked. You really... You're not rocking the normal Adidas look. I don't know what's going on, but hey, whatever. Much love. Thank you for coming on. We're going to talk about a variety of issues, as you already know. We are going to talk about your favorite issue, a grave injustice that's occurring in the world right now, Lula and Lula Livre, and then talk about right-wing radicalization that is occurring all around the planet with a resurgence of fascist movements and fascist governments, and how and maybe even engage in a dialectic and try to figure out what the left needs to do to respond to that, and what is necessary for us to organize. And of course, we're going to talk about Exiting the Vampire Castle by Mark Fisher. Or sorry, did I say that right? Okay, yeah, that's right, right? Okay, anyway.
Yeah.
Like maybe some critiques of that. And then afterwards, we're gonna talk about the ideology. The lack of ideology is an ideological position. Very Zizek style analysis there. So let's get started. Are you excited? I'm excited to have you here. Thank you for coming on.
Dude, of course I'm excited. Congrats on the new show. I'm ready. Let's do this.
All right, well, let's get started. Okay, so before we get into the vampire, before we get into the famous essay penned by Mark Fisher in 2013, I believe, about exiting the vampire castle and having a compassionate, all-inclusive left rather than a moralizing, exclusive left, let's just throw to you really quickly for you to give us a brief analysis of what's going on over in Brazil in regards to car wash investigations, Lula, and what the latest is.
Well, just working backwards, this is the 500th day that Lula da Silva is in prison. He's definitely the world's most prominent political prisoner. And what you have happening in Brazil today is you have like sort of the core beachhead in Latin America of what sort of you can say is some type of global authoritarian politics that spans, ideologically and sometimes even pretty, in a really synchronized way. United States, India, Hungary, many forces in the UK, and certainly Brazil. And this has huge implications for labor, for various civil rights of gay, lesbian, transgender people. It has a global implication because there's an accelerating destruction of the Amazon. Working it backwards, starting in 2009 with a US-backed coup or a US-recognized support of a coup government in Honduras, you really saw the Obama administration start to reverse what was called the pink tide in Latin America. And that was a span of governments led by Brazil and Lula, but also by Chavez in Venezuela, who had their own differences. They were in different places ideologically, some more in the social democratic center, some more radical, but together as a bloc, they lifted about 70 million people out of poverty, and Lula alone lifted 40 million people out of poverty. He was put in jail in 2018 on charges that were never substantiated, and now we know from the leaks and The Intercept that what was always analytically obvious, we have all the proof for, which is that this was a politically motivated process because he was the leading candidate. He led all polls by double digits. There's no doubt that there was a role of US DOJ and US backing. And I think at the end of the day, it's significant both that the right could not win in Brazil without these outside of democracy maneuvers. And also that even though Lula was in some ways conciliatory, he was not willing to privatize oil reserves and make it basically make it accessible for U.S. exploration. And I think that needs to be understood as well. So we have a guy who's an incredible political talent in a strategically vital country, put in jail on embarrassing grounds. It's disgusting. The only person who's called for him to be released who's running for president is Bernie Sanders. And again, because of how synchronized all of these things are, if you had a leader like Lula now in Brazil, you'd have a beachhead against this broader trend you're talking about.
Yeah, as Bolsonaro has signaled support for in the past, the Guaido transitional government that was backed by against U.S. state interests. So as you mentioned, like there's an international element to this that is quite significant, and that's why I want to mention like the fear that I have as far as right-wing radicalization occurring all around the world right now, with like proto-fascist governments and even fascist governments seizing control of these nation states, these giant economies like Brazil, but then also in Hungary, Poland, you have Salvini in Italy, you have the Swedish Democrats also gaining momentum in Sweden. Like even social democracies are susceptible to this sort of right-wing authoritarian corruption. And And unfortunately, because of the major gains of the financialization of our industries, and because of the major gains that capital has made in the constant ongoing class struggle against labor, there is not really a strong or muscular left that can effectively combat against these authoritarian governments. And I am genuinely fearful about the future if there aren't more leaders like Bernie Sanders, if there aren't more like left-wing leaders who are willing to organize. A significant difference, of course, between the Sanders campaign and any other campaign is, and you have mentioned this as well, Michael, that the Sanders campaign is focused on organizing, regardless of whether they win or not. And that is a really important distinction to make between like even the Elizabeth Warren campaign. Aside from the stylistic choices that they make, there is a substantive difference there that I find to be quite significant. But having said that, as far as talking about,
it's huge, and I just not only that, when you include foreign and military policy, and you understand that this is a globally synchronized thing, there is absolutely night and day difference between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. You know, it's totally fine to recognize that Elizabeth Warren is obviously, yeah, I mean, these are radically different propositions about how you understand global problems, and ultimately, and particularly in Brazil, but you might see this in the United States. The real problem is you have this insurgent far-right authoritarianism, and then frankly, you have a lot of people who might identify stylistically on the quote-unquote center, but they are not willing to, you know, they were willing to go along with Lula being in, as an example, and they have a total fixation against the left. And so you have this double bind, right? Like you even have like one other analogy would be like with the Iran deal. The Europeans know it was a great deal, it was working well, but they don't have the guts and the strength to fight against Trump and the Republican Party and Israel and Saudi Arabia to preserve the deal, even though, they know it's a disaster, it was torn up. So it's also this squishy kind of center as well. That's a big problem.
Yeah. A powerless center when we're discussing like the social democrats in Europe, but I would say very powerful center when it comes to liberals in America. That is still the position that is adopted by what people assume are liberals for the most part. And again, the only way to fight against this is agitating, is organizing, and is helping people understand where they are in the ongoing class struggle that has never ended, regardless of any amount of state reform that makes it seem like unions have a little bit more power, that we have seen over and over again get stripped away quite as soon as someone takes their hand off the dial or whatever. So what I want to talk about now is, though, I want to focus on the leftist organizing, because you have a very interesting opinion. You have a very interesting perspective on having like a more compassionate, all-inclusive left rather than a moralizing, exclusive left. And I pretty much agree with you, I think. Maybe there's some disagreements there, but as far as like who this extends to or what kind of ideology this extends to. But I think you and I are in agreement that we have to be more understanding of ignorant people and never assume malice if people are just simply ignorant, and accurately analyze the material conditions in which a lot of people are radicalized. Accurately analyze speak to the alienation that one feels, speak to the loneliness that one feels, and how this creates an environment that is rather a target-rich environment for radicalization, I would say, which the right and especially far-right elements oftentimes take advantage of. And this is even before we get into the fact that there are also a lot more wealthy institutions and wealthy people that are willing to support financially and materially these sorts of far-right radicalizing factors. And how it's normalized through white nativism in media and how white supremacy permeates through all of our institutions. So it's essentially like it's an uphill battle always for the left. And I feel, and maybe you can speak to this as well, I feel like we don't have, we can't not have allegiances with people exclusively because they don't fully subscribe their opinion. And I even extend that to social democrats who say that they are capitalists as well in America.
Well, I think that's definitely the case because you need to build a broad, coalition for power and for, averting some of the really the short-term catastrophes. And so what's interesting is a paradox of my message is that on one hand, I'm also actually trying to say, because I want people to be less petty and obsessive about relatively minor things in sort of internal squabbles, I actually think that we do need to be much more ruthless and strategic and serious about actually winning long-term political battles. So that's kind of the dialectic. I think where Mark Fisher comes in though is in this broader kind of so the paradox of how much things that sort of the individual as the center of political analysis, even when people are claiming their projects are kind of broader and group oriented, how much of the kind of analysis has to do with the specific assessment of individuals and whether or not they're in or out or right or wrong and blah, blah, blah. And I think that he was totally right, both in terms of a lot of the emotional toxicity of that and also the fact that it's not politics. It's not doing politics. So my point is actually that in the realm where we're talking more about those sorts of things, we actually need to look at it. We do literally need to be more emotionally intelligent and compassionate, both because you don't want to repel people and also because paradoxically, the reality would be is that if we were creating a healthier, more strategic environment, everybody obviously has room to grow. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody is going to kind of improve and evolve. And that's one pole of it. The other pole of it is, frankly, setting aside some of those things so that the real focus on power and politics and planning can actually come into effect. And that essay still really hits at all of the points here. And, it is a tragedy. I mean, Mark Fisher is a very important writer, very important cultural critic. Everybody should read, a lot of his work, not just The Vampire Castle. Everybody should read that too, obviously. But, he was writing from a place where he ended up committing suicide. He struggled with depression. And I think that he gauged some of the real unhealth of this, in a very personalized way. And we've got to deal with that, both to build our own best internal culture and also, frankly, to be, appealing to a broader mass market. And I really just want to be clear that he never said, and no one who's made this critique like me has ever said that it has anything to do with compromising on core values or core rights or anything else. That is not the critique.
Yeah,
and
no, that's
need
absolutely
to be able to make that distinction.
That's absolutely important to understand and definitely clearly communicate. I think his analysis of neo-anarchists is perfect and kind of even when I read that, it reminds me so much of a leftist momentum that you're seeing specifically on the internet, and he considers that to be mostly bourgeois criticisms and disinterest in engaging in politics, which I think is a bad thing. It's a bad idea. It's counterproductive. And a perfect example I will use is whenever people criticize Cenk for being a social democrat or Cenk for being somewhat of a defender of capitalism, not someone, but a staunch defender of capitalism, and sometimes in uneducated terms that might even come across as reactionary. But ultimately, this guy is out here actually building organizations that fight against Citizens United, like Wolfpack, or building organizations like Justice Democrats and propping up socialist and left-leaning candidates and encouraging other leftists to engage in electoralism. And there's no other way to win this battle. Just direct action or waiting for capitalism to collapse in and of itself is not going to cut it. Throughout that process, you also have to.
I'll just jump in. I'm sorry, there was a delay for a second, but I agree with you totally. I mean, that's a good example, right? Cenk. I think that's exactly what he's getting at too, right? Some of it is the reaction to somebody like Cenk. Some of it is just generation gap, and people have different tastes and different styles and and whatever, and that stuff really should not be a big deal and what people obsess over. And then the flip side is also recreating the room for actual disagreements that are not big ridiculous dramas, right? I've had disagreements with plenty of people that I have nothing but respect for and really like and do great work with. Actually, even about this Sanders and Warren thing, which is a pretty, that's like a very serious thing to be debating now, not like the kind of like jargon somebody uses or not. And I don't, to me, I've said it a million times, I don't think it's a degree thing. I think it's a kind thing. I think that there are different things. I think Sanders really represents something new. I hold that position really strongly, and I can argue that with people who are smart and strategic and share a lot of the same values. And that's okay. So I think what's funny is it's like you're interjecting two different kind of things, where on one hand, it's like, don't make a big melodrama out of nothing. And then on the other hand, actually recognize that you can have intense, strong, serious disagreements with people that you're friends with people that you're cool with, and people that you actually share a lot of the same aims with. And it's not that big of a deal. And that's when you also start to distinguish, like, well, who are the people in politics that really do need to actually just be destroyed, for lack of a better word, right? Like, and I think that actually makes when we need to be ruthless more effective, because it isn't just like a default that everybody runs to for, whatever they want to show themselves online. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Also, by the way, just for the record, this courtesy does not necessarily extend to the professional managerial class of neoliberals who are neoliberals in a professional capacity, just like that courtesy does not extend to professional conservative commentators or whatever who deal with misinformation, who traffic in this sort of behavior. And a great example, though, a real life example that we can point to as far as like having a more inclusive message that is all encompassing, that is positive, is what you talked about in regards to Cornel West. Dr. Cornel West was on the Joe Rogan show. I want to get into that really quickly. If you want to give us like a brief analysis of that, and then I want to show a video of a similar thing.
Well, I think to me, Cornel West is Lula's the political prisoner. Bernie's the candidate, Cardi B is the performer. Cornel West is the intellectual of our time. And I think that what is amazing about that interview, that's most important for people to see, is that he came in, he made a positive, radical message. And look, part of it is obviously Cornel West is incredibly charismatic and incredibly smart, but he also he was able to be appealing and an amazing representative of his politics to a broad audience, and he did not compromise on a single thing. You notice that? I mean, he centered every type of category of rights and justice imaginable in a way that was broadly translatable, obviously absorbed, of course, all the shortcomings and the mistakes that the left can make. And to me, like all I say is, I think that guy is the model. I think Cornel West is the perfect model for what we have right now. Speaking
of Cornel West being the perfect model, now not everyone has the intellectual rigor or the vast knowledge of all works extending back to like ancient Greek literature. But here is an example of Killer Mike on Bill Maher doing exactly what you were talking about, and radically changing the dynamic of the conversation when neoliberal shill Bill Maher, drops some stupid line. Let's take a look.
Bernie, who you support.
Yes.
Okay, he's for free college.
Yes.
I've raised this point before. Why should people who don't go to college be subsidizing the ones who do? Because the people who go to college are going to be making a lot more money. College is not free. Somebody's going to be paying for that college. I don't understand why the people who get the benefit of it shouldn't be paying for
college and trade school. And this is from a dad who has had children who went to both. My oldest son went to Omnitech Trade and learned computer engineering and things of that nature, and sound engineering. My daughter did 2 years. She did the same 2 years twice on me in Savannah State. 21 grand. I love her. That's my baby.
Really sticks in your mind there, doesn't it?
But yeah, I know. But he offered college and trade school. Part of being an American is being a steward for the next generation of Americans. My grandparents worked in fields. My grandmother went to college. My grandfather toiled on a blue-collar job so that my sisters and I could then have post-secondary education. I don't mind, as an American now, investing in the greater America. If we're going to build an infrastructure, you got to have carpenters and electricians. If that's one of your children, that's fine by me.
So that's a perfect way to reframe the argument and absolutely just slam dunk on Bill Maher, who was cynically saying, like, why are we paying for the wealthy and their college education? What do you think about Cardi, having this conversation or whatever? These are incredible speakers for like the Bernie Sanders campaign, because they have, and Russell Brand is another great example of this, by the way, which ironically was at the centerpiece of Mark Fisher's Exit in Vampire Castle conversation. But these are just normal individuals who haven't lost their like humble beginnings when they were a part of the working class, when they were struggling to make ends meet, and can communicate very clearly and in a passionate way, like this is a good thing. Now, there's more to talk about this, and we can do that on Twitch, Michael, but unfortunately, we have to go. We're running out of time. I just want to give a quick shout out to Michael Brooks. Thank you for coming on. Where can we find you?
You can find me at patreon.com/TMBS, at the whole show on Patreon, then Michael Brooks Show on YouTube. We have a lot of clips now. That show is going, so check it out.
It's my favorite show. I like it more. I like it more than the Majority Report. Also, you're live tonight, right?
Of course, you're a man of taste. Sorry, what was it?
You're live tonight, right?
Live tonight with Shahid Buttar and Anna Kasparian. Congrats on the show, man. It's awesome. I'm so stoked that you got this going. It's great.
Oh, well, thank you. And we'll have a long conversation on Twitch where we can do our impressions and whatnot, because I still want to do that. And talk about dry jacking.
Allahu Akbar.
All right, we'll be back soon. And when I come back with Mehdi Hasan, we're gonna have a long conversation. See you on the other side. It's for members only. All right, welcome back to Agit Prop. This is the behind the paywall for members only content. I hope none of you guys are pirating this right now, okay? Anyway, I am joined by an awesome guest, Mehdi Hasan. We share a name. He's the better Hasan. Him and Hassan Minhaj, unfortunately, are just like destroying every other Hasan in the marketplace of ideas. Before we get to him, you guys might know him. He's a Intercept columnist. He's the host of the podcast Deconstructive, which is an incredible podcast. I highly recommend you guys check that out. And a presenter on Al Jazeera English. You might know him from his absolute slam dunks on Al Jazeera against Trump surrogates. So let's take a look at that really quickly.
The president lies daily, multiple times. When he says we're the only country in the world where a person comes in and has a baby, and that baby is essentially a citizen of the United States, is that true or false?
No, it's false. It's a misstatement. That doesn't mean it's a lie.
Okay.
Okay.
He said there were riots going on in California against illegal immigration in so-called sanctuary cities. Were there any riots in California?
Oh, yes, there were.
Where?
There were a lot of civil disturbances.
Where were the riots? Where were the riots? Can you tell me where they were?
Oakland, California. There were street skirmishes in Los Angeles. Oh, yeah, that's a fact.
No, the California. No, hold on. The spokesman for the California Police Chiefs Association says there were no riots taking place as a result of sanctuary city policy. There were no riots. He just made it up. When he was asked to say where they were, he said, "Go look for them."
All right, that was Mehdi Hasan. Thank you for joining us. Mehdi, does it feel weird just seeing yourself on camera? Or do you feel like that's a good performance where you're like, I nailed that. It's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, poor old Steve Rogers there, who's named after Captain America, Trump surrogate. He didn't have the best of interviews. I think I realized when I was doing that interview that this wasn't going so well for him. He was uncomfortable. There's a great moment in that interview where he says, and most interviewees don't do this, but he actually says to me, "Okay, ask me your next question," because he just wants to move on. And I'm like, I don't move on. That's what I kind of highlight about my interview style. Well, thanks for having me on the show. It's great to be here. I've been looking forward to this, my fellow namesake.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, man. Seriously, I think you do a brilliant job at The Intercept. We have a lot of similar opinions. That's probably why, that's part of the reason why I love the work you do. Also, we come from similar backgrounds as well. I have seen a lot of your debates, Intelligence Squared debates, when you're talking against that oh my God, that one Saudi dude. Not Saudi dude, sorry, the one that was defending the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
Oh wow, the Egyptian guy that you absolutely demolished. So that's kind of what I want to talk about really quickly before we get into some other stuff, specifically regarding like the neoliberal approach to Islam and how they look at Islam as a monolith and how that's devastating and dangerous and perpetuates that same cycle of violence. But before we get to that, you have this debate style that I would, or this interview style that I would consider rather contentious, and I would even say like you're kind of like a pit bull. I don't know if you like that, analogy or not, but it is absolutely what's necessary, and it is absolutely what's lacking, unfortunately, in American media. And I just wanted to ask you, like, what's your process like? And then we can get into like debates as a whole.
Yeah. So I totally agree with you that it's lacking in the American media. When you say pit bull, yeah, it might sound insulting, but I'll take that as a compliment over some of the softer interviews that we see on US TV news. The Sunday morning shows are hard to watch. The way that US interviewers just don't push back against brazen lies, don't push back against spin, are over courteous to the point. I always make this point to American journalists. The president of the United States walks into a room of the White House press corps stands up, which is very deferential. You don't see that in the UK, for example, with the Prime Minister. No one would stand up for Prime Minister Theresa May or Boris Johnson or Tony Blair. And I just think you do need a little bit more aggression, if that's the word you want to use, to try and pin down these people. Jeremy Paxman, who is one of the most famous bulldog interviewers, pit bull interviewers in the United Kingdom, retired now as an interviewer, but he was on the BBC. I grew up watching him. He had a famous line. He said, "I start every interview with one thought in my mind. Why is this lying bastard lying to me?" And I think, some people say, "Oh, that's too negative, too aggressive." But really, in the grand scheme of things, especially today in our gaslighting era of Trump surrogates, surely that's how you have to start.
No, absolutely. What's funny is the famous BBC interview with Andrew Neil, right? If I'm not mistaken.
And Ben Shapiro.
And Andrew Neil is like a bit of a right-wing ghoul himself. Who's had rather interesting takes in regards to like AIDS and climate change denialism and whatnot.
But he's a brilliant interviewer.
But he still maintains that level of professionalism and doesn't have that same kind of attitude in regards to access journalism that a lot of the American media holds on to, because they're fearful that like Ben Shapiro might not come back, or they're fearful that a specific politician won't leak information to them or won't talk to them. And
it's worse than that, Hasan. It's worse than that. Access is definitely part of it, but it's also a cultural thing. There is a sense of, that's rude. You can't say that. You can't ask them about their private life. You can't ask them about some lie they told a couple of years ago or a racist tweet that they did. Let's just stick to kind of today's news. Let's not go there. Let's be very friendly. We want to party together later. We want to hang out together later. We're going to kind of scratch each other's backs. It's worse than just pure access. It's much more a cultural mindset where these people are not people you're holding to account. They're your colleagues, they're your friends, there's people you show a lot of respect to. You often see CNN anchors or others saying, at the end of the interview, "Thank you so much, Senator, for coming on the show," giggling together. You see sometimes even admitting to friendships on air. And that's a problem. I've interviewed people who are friends of mine, and sometimes they haven't ended the interview as friends of mine. But I just think your job is to be tough. Your job is to, call out the bullshit. Andrew Neil in that interview with Ben Shapiro not only called out the bullshit, but what was interesting is that Ben Shapiro is supposed to be this great intellectual of the right in the eyes of some liberals. Remember, it was the New York Times that called him the cool kids philosopher.
Yeah.
And yet it required a right-wing foreign journalist to actually really pull down the curtains and just show, there's nothing there really when you really push Ben Shapiro. He walks out, the great man who says, "Debate me, debate me, debate me," says, "I'm going to run away from this interview when it goes badly."
Yeah, it wasn't even a debate. It was an interview and like a light pushback.
To promote his book, and he didn't want to talk about the contents of his book.
Light pushback made him buckle like a picnic table, which is remarkable. And again, it's because he's comfortable in the American liberal and even conservative media bubble. But one thing I wanted to mention on top of the Ben Shapiro interview or the Ben Shapiro debate was like how good you are at probing you guys. One of the things that Ryan Grimm once told me that I love that statement about access journalism or whatnot was like, I asked him, like, aren't you afraid that you're gonna lose your sources if you don't, if you keep doing the investigative reporting that your team does at The Intercept? And he was like, no, the real journalism is supposed to be about having all of the background information and actually having like the answers to the questions that you have, so much so that it is unavoidable that this person has to answer. Real journalism isn't about like going up to a politician and asking like, these like simple questions that that everyone in American media ask, but actually about questions that are unavoidable, like that they have to answer, and even if they give a no comment answer on it, then they're going to look bad. And that requires a tremendous amount of work prior to and leading up to that investigative reporting or leading up to that question that you're asking someone. And that's something that's lacking, unfortunately, in American media. Now, there are still people like yourself and like the team over at Intercept that do a great job with that. But I want to
even credit where credit's due. Probably the toughest interviewer on American television right now is probably Chris Wallace, who hosts a Sunday morning show on Fox News.
Yeah.
So credit there. Here's a guy who's on a kind of completely kind of propagandistic, basically state-run TV channel, and yet he still does tough interviews. He still manages, by American standards, I'm saying, tough interviews, and he still gets good guests. That's what's interesting. This idea that people won't come on your show if you ask tough questions. Yes, to an extent, someone like Donald Trump definitely is never going to do an interview with me. He won't even go on, CNN anymore. He only does friendly interviews. But Chris Wallace still gets Mike Pompeo and still gets Kellyanne Conway and still gets, various senior administration officials. And he does ask them tough questions, to be fair to him.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just ask you really quickly about debates, though.
Yeah.
Do you think that now there's a culture, there's an online debate culture right now that's growing, and that I think has partly facilitated in the growth of even right-wing radicalization. You have very famous right-wing debaters. One of them that we just mentioned, Ben Shapiro. Another one is Steven Crowder in his debate series, where he just sets up this disproportionate, asymmetry of power kind of situation, where he dunks on fledgling college freshmen who are standing in front of a microphone for the first time ever, and he's intimidating. He's this intimidating presence, and he has his talking points, and he sets it up in a way where he's change my mind, when in fact he already has the talking points available to destroy young college students who don't know how to deal with a propagandist like that. So I've always maintained the position that debates can be instructive. Debates can be really good at de-radicalizing people, or debates can be good when you finally match up against the other side's arguments and potentially even arrive at the truth in certain circumstances. But ultimately, it is still for show, and that I feel like I feel like a lot of people on the right, especially, or a lot of kids on the internet now, feel as though debates are the primary form of learning things, and it's just so wrong, because rhetoric trumps all in a debate.
I think you're spot on there, Hasan. And I think, I'm not a free speech junkie. I'm not one of these people who's the only response to bad speech is good speech. As you point out, there's something called a power symmetry. It's too easy just to say, there's all these bad actors, bad faith actors saying horrible things. We will respond with the correct, the truth, reason. First of all, we know from human psychology that reason is not how people change their minds. As you pointed out, the power of rhetoric, the power of emotional appeals. Look at the president of the United States right now, a demagogue who is able to win over massive crowds. You watch those rallies, they are something spectacular in their own bizarre, grotesque way. He's not engaging with them in some kind of evidence-based reasoning, some kind of Socratic dialogue, right? So you're right there to point out, the kind of the deficiency of the debate format. I'm all for debates when they're in good faith. Unfortunately, we live in an era now where there are very few good faith actors on the right. There was a time 10, 20 years ago in the UK, in the US, across the West, you could have good faith debates about economic policy or foreign policy, whatever it is. We don't have that today. We just don't. I mean, I just a few moments ago, I was just watching some clip on the internet of a friend of mine, Omar Badar, doing a debate on Rashida Tlaib, and he immediately accused of anti-Semitism by some Israeli guest in Tel Aviv. When you have that kind of bad faith actors who are not willing to kind of actually engage in the issues, and look at Ben Shapiro, when someone did try and engage in the issues, he just ran away because he much prefers to dunk on college freshmen, as you point out. That's a problem. So as much as I'm for debates, and I host debates on my weekly show up front, we have an arena format, which is very much one-on-one, go at it. We don't try and do them in bad faith. We do try and set them up equally. And we do try and do them on topics where you can actually have some light and not just heat. Although I do enjoy heat. I'll be honest, I enjoy heat. But it has to come with some light too. It can't just be, people have asked me to debate all sorts of randoms on the right. And I say no if I don't think it's worth it. Because, there is a debate about, do you give them a platform? Do you amplify their message? Do you legitimize them? We've had rows about going on Fox News. I wouldn't go on Fox News. That's my personal choice, because as much as I'd love to go and dunk on Tucker Carlson, I could probably do it in my sleep, I would argue. I don't want to give, I don't want to give him that legitimacy or give him that seriousness, because I know he's a bad faith actor.
Yeah, bad faith actor who engages in quite a lot of fascist messaging, like white nationalist messaging.
Too. P.S. He's a racist.
I mean, no, I agree 100%. So that's actually really interesting that you pointed that out. I always say it takes 1 second to lie about anything, but 5 minutes to actually arrive at the truth, to undo the damage of that person lying. Whether it be a Nazi misinformation agent who's just gonna throw some crazy propaganda, like Nazi propaganda, out there, or whether it be climate change denial, for example. Like if Ben Shapiro was debating a scientist on the matter, he would still probably win, especially if it was like a timid scientist. But that doesn't mean that you've arrived at the truth. It just means that Ben Shapiro was better at rhetoric and was able to successfully overwhelm his opponent.
And therefore, there is an argument for not platforming these people. People say,
exactly.
No, free speech. That's not how it works. It's very naive. And a very crude and simplistic version of free speech and debate.
Really quick, before we move on to the next subject, because that's a really interesting one that I want to talk to you about, what tips would you give to people out there, and of course this includes myself, when they are engaging people? I want to do like a longer conversation with you about this as well, but what tips would you give to people who are engaging others in the marketplace of ideas on the internet?
So the first one is the one we just mentioned. Don't bother. Don't waste your time with that thing. It's just not worth it. I know a lot of people wanted to get a kind of step up or to get attention. In the long run, I don't think it's worth it. But on the other hand, if you do it, I mean, there's many tips. I'll give you 2 right now that I think are very important. Number 1, be prepared. I find a lot of people are not prepared. People say to me, "Oh, how did you do in that segment? How did you have all those numbers or stats?" Because I prepared. Because I went along knowing he's going to ask me, he or she is going to ask me X or Y. I need to have this stat, this fact, this figure ready to go in order to show that I'm prepared, in order to show that I know more than my opponent. Know more than your opponent knows about your opponent's argument. That is key. That requires preparation. That requires actually studying, researching, preparing. Don't wing it. Don't do things on the fly. Even if you're the best debater out there, you have to prepare. And the second point I say is confidence. We lack confidence often. A lot, as you point out, the power of rhetoric. Half the debate victory is in how you present if you're not confident in your own arguments, if you're not confident in your own positions, then why should the audience be confident in you? And I think you look at someone like Shapiro. You look at Donald Trump. I mean, he's basically president of the United States today because of his uber overconfidence. That guy has no right being there. He knows he has no right being there, but he was confident enough to run, and he's confident enough to bullshit his way through it. Now he's managed to kind of spectacularly get elected. He's
also benefiting from what is known as the Dunning-Kruger effect, where he overestimates his own intelligence. And I think a lot of people on the right actually do that as well, which is definitely a significant weapon to have when you are trying to overwhelm your opponents and engage in this like bravado and machismo and talk about your talking points in this very confident way, regardless of whether or not there's any veracity to those claims. I always second guess myself. It's a big problem. But let's move on to the second segment that I wanted to talk to you about, which is you're Muslim, right? And I am as well.
Last time I checked.
Yeah, last time you checked, you're Muslim.
Last time I ordered a burger and checked there's no bacon in it.
Well, I'm definitely a more haram Muslim than you are, certainly. Especially the one cardinal sin, which is never eat pork. You can do everything else, just don't eat pork. I even have a hard time following that. But the reason why I'm mentioning this is because there are obviously a lot of progressive Muslims out there. There are progressive Muslims like yourself, and you, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if you want to talk about this or not, but like you had a more conservative beginning, right? Like you were a little bit more conservative in the when you first started in like the public sphere, and you had this radical transformation and. That's an awesome thing, but I want to highlight that, not the transformation itself, but like I want to highlight the fact that there are progressive Muslims out there, like yourself and like myself, who advocate for progressive values. Ilhan Omar is a perfect example of this. Rashida Tlaib is a perfect example of this, that are actually fighting from the left and actually fighting for progress. And yet there's still this inescapable understanding that has been cultivated by liberal media figures that Islam is a monolith, that Islam is a conservative religion, that every single Muslim is conservative across the board, and if you're not
conservative, if you're not a hardcore literalist, then you're not really a Muslim. You're not really a proper Muslim. So you have the Sam Harrises and Bill Maher's of this world basically allying with ISIS to basically saying that only the ISIS view of Islam is the real Islam, which is deeply pernicious and dangerous.
Yeah, which ironically then also feeds into that same cycle of violence, because there is a underlying justification of Western expansion, Western military conquest, Western imperialism that destabilizes these environments and creates a target-rich environment for radicalization or for radical and fundamental elements to take control over that society in the aftermath of the rubble that the Americans leave believe
you wouldn't be able to invade and occupy all these countries if you hadn't already set the scene with the kind of Islamophobia mood music, which is both liberal and conservative. I just wrote a piece today about how the New Yorker just did an 8,500 word profile, a very good profile of Mike Pompeo and all his kind of awfulness. And yet in 8,500 words, they couldn't find even space for one sentence about the fact that Pompeo is a hardcore card-carrying Islamophobe with links to some of the worst far-right people, the Bridget Gabriels, the Frank Gaffneys of this world. They did not mention this at all, even though it's what drives him as Secretary of State. If he's going to go to war with Iran, don't we think we should know about his views of Muslims? If somebody was going to go to war with Israel who was an anti-Semite, you'd want to know that. The idea that Pompeo is a hardcore Islamophobe doesn't even feature in a liberal magazine's 8,500 word profile. That's what sets the scene. And this is actually demonstrated, factually. ISPU, which is a think tank, does an annual Islamophobia index, interviewing people, asking them questions about their views on Muslims. And what they found is there's a close correlation between how Islamophobic you are, how many anti-Muslim views you hold, and whether you support authoritarian political views, whether you support state-sponsored discrimination against minority groups. There's an absolute correlation between, being Islamophobic, holding negative views of Muslims, stereotyping Muslims, and supporting wars against Muslims, anti-terror policies that discriminate against Muslims. So yeah, it's a double whammy, and there's very much a responsibility at the feet of liberals too, who reinforce this narrative, even unwittingly. I always give the example of Bill Clinton at the DNC in 2016, stands up and says, if you're Muslim and if you love this country, we want you to stay and help us fight. What the hell does that mean? Who the hell is Bill Clinton to invite my American Muslim daughter born in this country to stay here? And why should you have to fight anyone in order to stay here?
Yeah. Why should there be a fight to begin with? It's a ridiculous notion.
It's the securitization of Muslims by liberals and conservatives alike.
Yeah, and what's really remarkable when thinking about this kind of rhetoric is, like we mentioned, it justifies Western expansion and destabilization and plays into the hands of ISIS, while we're also supporting and facilitating like Wahhabi extremism, something that you've talked about quite frequently. We align ourselves with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which is currently committing light genocide, I would say, in Yemen. And they're using our weapons, and they have a lot of wealth to purchase them. So even when they end up going and assassinating, butchering a American legal permanent resident, Jamal Khashoggi, in an embassy in Turkey, in Istanbul, Donald Trump turns around and says, hey, they're buying $10 billion of weapons. We can't do anything.
So what's worse than that, again, I have no expectations of Donald Trump or Mike Pompeo. The New Yorker profile points out that Pompeo just wanted the Khashoggi story to go away. Surprise, surprise. But when you have someone like Sam Harris, who calls himself a liberal, is still held up by many people as a liberal, he comes out and says, people are, oh, he's not anti-Muslim. He's only against the ideology of Islam. Not true. He comes out and he says that Senator Ted Cruz, it's totally reasonable for Ted Cruz, hardcore right-wing Republican, to prefer Christian refugees over Muslim refugees. He says, Sam Harris says, that's a reasonable position. Now, number one, how is that not incitement of hatred and violence against Syrian Muslim refugees? How is that not a justification for taking action against Syrian Muslim refugees? You're basically saying, A, religious discrimination. I thought you're a new atheist, you're against all religion. Oh no, apparently Syrian Christians fine, Syrian Muslims bad. And that is a fundamental problem here. When you have this kind of rhetoric, as you say, it does feed into the foreign policy. It does feed into the expansionism and the imperialism. And I'm sorry, you can't pretend it's nothing to do with you. It's just a right-wing thing. Not true. Yeah, no, liberals absolutely have this position as well that, again, justifies Islamophobia at every step and potentially even does a better job at normalizing this kind of rhetoric, because we expect, like you said, the conservatives to be anti-Islam and Islamophobic to begin with. There was another thing I wanted to ask you about this. So let's move on to the second part of this, which is there is a positive note here, and we're going to go to that video really quickly. It's the conversation is changing in regards to BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions movement in America, partially because of progressive Muslims like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar.
Palestinians don't have to be saints in order to deserve the basic rights that all of us take for granted, right? Miftah has said things that I disagree with. They made an anti-Semitic statement that they apologized for. The point is, when you go there, I say this as an American Jew. My children go to Jewish day school. I lead services in an Orthodox synagogue. Judaism is the center of my life. The first time I went to spend time with Palestinians in the West Bank, it was a shattering experience. The only thing I could imagine would be similar for American would be going to visit the Jim Crow South. When you see people living under the control of the state with no rights, they cannot become citizens. They cannot vote for the state that controls their lives. They do not have free movement. They need a pass to move from city to city. They live under a military legal system. The consequences are more brutal than we can imagine sitting here. So do I agree with Miftah? Of course not. I had a close friend who was killed in a suicide bombing. But Palestinians don't. You could have made the same argument if you went to visit SNCC and said, oh, they were connected with communists. Some of their people have made anti-white statements. The point is, what Ilhan Omar said is the most important point. People need to go and see for themselves. I've never seen anyone who's gone and seen for themselves and not been transformed by the experience.
So I know you have some thoughts about this, so let's hear it. I mean, this is remarkable. This is a radical change in the Overton window shifting right in front of our eyes, where CNN is discussing the conditions in which Palestinian people living in the West Bank are subject to these horrific conditions, horrific living conditions by the state of Israel, America's greatest ally and the only democracy in the Middle East, if you ask Republicans and even liberals.
Very much so. I mean, it's definitely shifting. Some would say this has been a pivotal moment in the debate over Israel-Palestine, definitely in my lifetime, definitely in my career of watching American politics and following American foreign policy on the Middle East. And it has come as a direct result. The reason Peter Boehnert can go on CNN and talk in that way, and credit to Peter, good for him for doing that, is because Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar opened this conversation. And actually, in a way, they didn't even open it. It's because that they were attacked. Here's what's so amusing and ironic in this whole depressing, bleak situation. It's because of the vicious attacks on Ilhan and Rashida from the right, from supporters of Netanyahu and Trump, that actually has emboldened them to really push on this issue, much more than they did when they were elected. I remember when they were elected just last year. We weren't hearing any of this stuff. I mean, they were saying this stuff. A lot of us had high expectations that Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, having a Palestinian American woman, having a Muslim woman in a headscarf in Congress would change the conversation. But the irony is, it's because of the bad faith attacks on them, the disingenuous attacks, the smears accusing them of being anti-Semites, accusing them of being supporters of terrorism, accusing them of being anti-American. It's always that put the spotlight on them and then backfired, because you put the spotlight on two women who weren't going to take this shit. And we're actually going to come out and hold a press conference as they did yesterday and speak emotionally, passionately in that way to humanize the Palestinian people, to humanize refugees in the way that Ilhan and Rashid has done. So the attacks on them have backfired from Trump downwards. I know that Donald Trump and his advisors think this is going to be our election campaign, and yes, it will help them energize their racist MAGA base. I get all that, but in the long run, this has opened doors and made people there are centrists. Let's go back to the liberals, Hassan. There are liberal supporters of Israel, the PEPs, the progressives except Palestine, the people who are lefty on every issue except when it comes to Israel. There are those people who want it to be a bipartisan issue. They don't want to say anything more than, I support a two-state solution. We'll have that one day with a peace process. And they don't want to have this uncomfortable conversation about occupation, about boycotts, about the dehumanization of Palestinian people, both in the Middle East and here in the United States. And these guys, these two women, by doing this, have totally transformed the conversation. And I'm not sure that liberal supporters of Israel can put the genie back in the bottle now.
Yeah, speaking of which, by the way, speaking of like anti-Semitism coming from the right that often falls on deaf ears by those people like Ben Shapiro, who constantly claim that like everyone's being anti-Semitic. Yeah, Trump is a gigantic anti-Semite. Recently, while we were having this conversation a few minutes before we went live, Trump said on Omar and Tlaib, any Jewish people that vote for a Democrat, I think that either shows a total lack of knowledge or great disloyalty. So 75% of American Jews who vote Democrat are either ignorant and or disloyal, which is that is anti-Semitism.
Ben Shapiro, indeed.
Yeah, Ben Shapiro's done this too.
You mentioned Shapiro. He said the similar things. Yeah, if you're not a real Jew, if you're a liberal or a leftist. Well, it's interesting about Trump. First of all, let me say two things in response to that, which I hadn't seen. The two things I would say is, number one, with Trump, it's always projection, right? Whenever he says something, it's really related to him. Yeah. So when he says, oh, if you're anti-Semitic, voting for Democrat, actually it's the exact reverse. You would argue anyone who votes for Donald Trump and the Republican Party in this age of white nationalism, in an age where people are going into synagogues and shooting them, and we now have Republican talking points leaked to the press which show that they're told not to talk about white nationalism at all and just talk about the left. basically endangering Jews in synagogues across the United States, yeah, why would you vote for that party when you have people like Steve Scalise who says I'm David Duke without the baggage, when you have people like Kevin McCarthy who says Jewish billionaires are trying to buy the democratic elections, when you have people like Louis Gohmert who's obsessed with George Soros, or Matt Gaetz who invites Holocaust terrorists to State of the Union. That is the modern Republican Party. It's basically a white nationalist party now. So yes, I would ask why the 25% of Jews who vote Republican still vote Republican. But what's interesting is the second point I'd make, Hasan, is this is not a new conversation. The Republicans for several years now have been trying to peel off American Jews and get them to vote Republican. We saw that with Romney. We saw that. Remember when Huckabee said Barack Obama is leading Jews to the oven? Do you remember that? That ridiculous, cheapening the Holocaust there. No one called him an anti-Semite at the time on the right. That was all part of this obsession with why are these Jews voting for Barack Obama when he's throwing Israel under the bus? He wasn't throwing Israel under the bus. He gave Israel more weapons than any president in modern history. But also, he also got more votes. I think this is true. He got more votes, Barack Obama, from Jews than any human being in the history of mankind. No human being on earth has had no Israeli prime minister has had more Jewish votes than Barack Obama got. So it didn't work with Obama. I don't think it's going to work with the next presidential candidate. I will laugh my head off if Bernie Sanders is a Democratic presidential candidate and Trump decides to use anti-Semitism as his card against the first Jewish presidential candidate in American history.
100% that's coming. I mean, there is a reason why you can tie a direct line, like you can draw a direct line from cultural Bolshevism and cultural Marxism, which are fascist dog whistles historically used and created by Nazis, to the modern day Republican Party and their messaging and how similar it is. Sometimes literally the exact same when they talk about
Soros.
Yeah, George Soros. It's like immigration is a Jewish conspiracy to destroy like Western civilization or destroy like white heteromasculinity or heteronormativity in this country. Like these are Nazi ideals, and it's brought up to the mainstream. And a lot of people benefit from, like a lot of white nationalists and Nazis benefit from the white supremacy that is a part of our institutions, that has historically been a part of our institutions, and the white nativist messaging that you hear from our institutions right now, whether it be media or literal politicians.
But what's so interesting about Trump and Netanyahu is that they've done so much to mainstream white supremacy and are so unapologetic about it that in fact they've pushed probably more American Jews away from the Republican Party, and they've pushed more Americans in general away from Israel. So I said this the other night when I think I was on MSNBC, and I made this point. I said Trump and Netanyahu are the greatest recruiting sergeants for BDS and the boycott movement. That's the great irony. By making Israel a partisan, not a bipartisan issue, by being so nakedly colonial and racist in their approach to the Palestinians and the entire Middle East, it basically, the cover's off. And it forces those liberals who head behind this whole two-state solution, which is no longer on the cards, to really come out and say, well, where do you stand on Palestinian human rights? Why are you opposing Trumpian racism at home, but okay with Netanyahu in racism abroad?
Yeah, no, that's always been a remarkable dichotomy where it's like, but it happens. It happens with neoliberal justifications of the exploitation of the global poor as well. If it's exploitation abroad, then liberals who normally would be like, what are we doing about the American working class? Like, what about the white working class? Will quite frequently engage in practices that directly justify the wholesale exploitation of the global poor, and that's fine because it's abroad. It's liberation for me, but not for thee. Kind of similar to how traditional conservatives, right, or tradcast, traditional Catholics, and like a lot of these right-wing nationalists or these right-wing radicals who want traditionalist values for the white people that they consider to be a part of their in-group, but then will turn around and use that traditionalism to attack Muslims and say, well, they're just not integrating. They're just not integrating fast enough into our culture.
Exactly.
It's like, what do you mean? Ilhan Omar is like defending trans rights when the Republican administration is doing everything they can to attack trans people to make their lives much worse in this country, whether it be like the trans military ban or like fighting against the Obama era rules that allowed trans people to seek shelter in homeless shelters, like undoing that rule, or allowing medical professionals on religious reasons to stop treating trans individuals or members of the LGBT community. These are all right-wing ideas. And ironically, they are similar to the fundamentalist right-wing conservative Muslims, which a lot of liberals try to paint the entirety of the Muslim religion, entirety of Islam and followers of Islam as. So, you know, it's a weird situation.
I agree with you.
Anyway, look, I want to keep going. If you want to keep talking about this, we can, but it is 1:37 and I know you got to leave soon.
I got to go, unfortunately, but I will come back, I promise.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming. Where can we find you, Mehdi Hasan? Thank you so much for coming, but just give us your quick shout out.
I'm at The Intercept, I'm at Al Jazeera English, and I'm on Twitter at Mehdi R. Hasan if you want to come have a row.
All right, thank you so much.
Thanks, Hasan.
All right. We're gonna go to a quick break, and then when we come back, we're gonna be talking about the Hong Kong protests with our producer, Dan from the internet, and perhaps a new segment if we have time. All right, we're back on Agit Prop. Now, the person who will be joining me, hopefully to add additional context to the things that we're talking about is Dan Evans Nakamura, AKA Dan from the internet, our producer. I don't know, how does that camera look? Can we see? Can we just get a quick?
Yeah, we're good. We're good.
Right.
Is we live? Is we live?
This is very Sam Harris. I mean, Sam Cedar, not Sam Harris. Sorry. Very Majority Report. Okay.
Pause it for a second.
All right. Do you see? Okay, so let's get started. So, there is supposed to be a SOT for the Hong Kong protests, right? Okay, yeah. Let's before we get started, there's protests that are ongoing in Hong Kong. That have been happening every single weekend and throughout the week for the past 11 weeks. These are similar to the ongoing protests that occurred a couple years back called the Umbrella Protests. We're going to take a look at some of the compelling visual imagery right now.
President Xi Jinping's last Hong Kong visit was 2 years ago to mark 20 years since the handover of what was a British colony to China. He minced no words then about who was in control.
Any attempt to endanger China's sovereignty and security, challenge the power of central government and the basic law of Hong Kong, or to use Hong Kong to conduct infiltration and sabotage against the mainland is an act that crosses the red line.
But the past 11 weeks of mass protests in Hong Kong seem to cross that red line, the government even calling some of it near terrorism. However, there's been not a single word from Xi himself.
Okay, so let's just throw up the B-roll really quickly as well while I describe the stuff that's going on. So as I mentioned, 11 weeks, there has been ongoing protests in Hong Kong. There is like a crazy amount of people, I believe 1.7 million people organizing against mainland China, specifically trying to extradite a criminal from Taiwan, and the political precedent that this may potentially set as China makes additional efforts to accelerate the transitional period, the handoff that was supposed to happen between the UK and the Chinese government. The protest started over the proposed extradition law to China. Hong Kong wants to maintain pro-democracy. That's what they're calling it. That's what Western media is calling these protests as well. And aspects of Hong Kong's autonomy haven't been respected, and Hong Kong's pro-China business interests are influencing, and youth and professionals are participating in the march. A lot of the march is backed by the youth, and there is also an element here where like China maintains a significant amount of control over the business class of Hong Kong. There is also a different analysis that I will provide to you here in regards to income inequality and wealth inequality that's occurring in Hong Kong as well. Before we go to you, Dan, hold on. Let me just mention the 5 demands that they are making, okay? So this looks crazy from the outside. This might look like this grassroots mobilization that's occurring against essentially authoritarian state capture of Hong Kong, but the demands that they have are quite reasonable. The 5 demands are full withdrawal of the extradition bill, resignation of Chief Executive Carrie Lam in democratic elections, government must not classify protests as riots, which I find to be quite funny. We're gonna talk about that in a second. Full independent investigation into police behavior. Everyone arrested protesting must be unconditionally freed. Now, the biggest fear that people in Hong Kong have is that this might set a dangerous precedent for potential political prisoners that might get extradited to mainland China for violating some of the laws of mainland China. Obviously, if you go back multiple decades or centuries, you will realize that the reason why Hong Kong has a drastically different culture than mainland China is because of British colonialism. Hong Kong was given off to the British after the Opium Wars. And because of that, there is quite a different culture there. There's a culture of liberalism, which while I also am a leftist, I somewhat understand and appreciate in regards to certain tenets like free speech or free expression, right to free assembly, that sort of stuff. Dan, you wanted to say something. Let's. What's going on?
Yeah, I wanted to clarify with LegCo that
what is that?
So LegCo, if we go to the first graphic, it says that Hong Kong's pro-China business interests are influencing LegCo. It stands for Legislative Council, and it's the most ridiculous thing I ever read when I was researching the story. So basically, the business interests in China have seats on the Legislative Council. And of course, the business interests are going to go with, the Legislative Council in Hong Kong, obviously. But the business interests that are holding actual seats there, like a representative of the finance industry in Hong Kong has a seat. The representative of the pharmaceutical industry in Hong Kong has a seat, just like regular citizens do. And so what that means is that those business interests are directly tied to mainland China, Xi Jinping, all of that economic sort of organization, and what comes with it, lack of democracy that the people of Hong Kong are protesting. So over time, since the 2000s, when since 1997 around, when Hong Kong was able to have its own region, this business side of the board has just been getting more and more seats, and they've been aligning closer and closer with China, obviously for economic interests. And so that's a big factor here that they're organizing against. They wanted to contextualize.
There was also so that's actually exactly what I want to talk about as well. There was a Hong Kong airline whose employees were also protesting, and mainland China directly gave orders over to the business interests there that if any of their employees were participating in the protest, that they would be held to legal scrutiny, and that's why a lot of the business owners and those who have interest in conducting business with China, mainland China, which represents the broad, overwhelming majority of business owners in Hong Kong, are towing the line and taking the side of mainland China in this endeavor, or in this ongoing struggle, I guess. There's also obviously statements about CIA involvement, or these protesters waving the Union Jack or waving American flags. And look, guys, I hate US imperialism, okay? You already know this. This is not a secret, all right? But just because China stands in opposition to US imperialist interests more often than not, doesn't mean that this is completely backed by CIA or completely backed by US business interests. An example I would use is how liberals sound absolutely silly when they talk about how Donald Trump became president because of Russia, or that a couple $1 million in ad spend was enough for Americans to come to the precipice or the edge of a race war. Obviously, there is a lot of unrest, is what I mean. Am I ruling out the fact that there could be some involvement from the CIA? Of course not. It is a strategic decision. It is absolutely a perfectly fine strategic decision if we look at it from just an exclusive amoral, draconian sense. I mean, not draconian, sorry, Machiavellian sense that the CIA would facilitate these and support these protests, and that Western media would absolutely be complicit in hiding potential wrongdoings on behalf of the protesters. But ultimately, if you have 1.7 million people protesting in an incredibly organized fashion, it seems like the people of Hong Kong are not necessarily very interested in giving up their autonomy over to Chinese rule. This is more of a symbolic protest in that regard. What's up, Dan?
Right, and I think kind of to your point of kind of addressing the tankies in the audience, all three of y'all, but kind of really talking to the significance of this is that you can kind of see in what they're fighting for in the 5 demands that these are people, we can find solidarity with people in Hong Kong who are standing against their government, who, like our own government in the United States, is more interested in economic interests and furthering those economic interests, whether or not those people do better.
Yeah. It's just, I look, there are a lot of issues that are happening in Hong Kong, and there are certainly a lot of issues in mainland China as well. Mainland China's economic issues are one thing, and mainland China's social stranglehold that they have over what kind of information gets disseminated, or how the media analyzes certain events, or even the concentration camps they are putting millions of Uyghur Turks, Uyghur Muslims in the northern part of China. Like, there are a lot of terrible things that China does. And then on top of that, there's a lot of gross, unfettered capitalism, unchecked capitalism that's occurring in Hong Kong that's causing a severe amount of income and economic and wealth inequality there. So there are problems there, but it seems like if you look at, if you ask the people of Hong Kong, they prefer social liberalism over a more authoritarian government that could potentially build out a more robust social safety net in Hong Kong for the working poors in Hong Kong. I don't know. This is an ongoing frustration that I have with leftists as far as allowing political dissidents to have the freedom to talk about their opinions without free from government scrutiny, and obviously it manifests itself in allegiances to more libertarian economic structures exclusively because there is a social libertarianism that comes along with it that is more favorable for the overwhelming majority of people. So maybe that's something that we should figure out when we are trying our other socialist and leftist projects in the future in order not to repeat the mistakes of the past. All right, so we have a very special new segment. It's a little bit of a lighthearted segment. Let's just cut to that. There's like a video, right? I can't believe that snake doesn't lick the boot. We got to change that. I mean, that was incredible though. All right, this is the new segment called Please Tread on Me. Now, this is an ode to all of the bootlickers, to all of those factory workers who the temporarily embarrassed millionaires and billionaires who do not realize that they are an exhausted and exploited proletariat and that one day they will become the one who owns the boot. But until that day comes, and it probably never will, statistically speaking, they will lick that boot clean. Now, on today's episode, we're gonna take a look at Andy Ngo, okay? Famous, I don't wanna say journalist. Like, my mouth won't allow me to say journalist. The words are just, if you ask liberals and conservatives, they think he's a journalist, but he's not. Defender of race science, defender of craniology, and maybe even phrenology, but most famously known for his astute defense of white nationalists, violent right-wing radical terrorists, domestic terrorists like the Proud Boys, and his just famously known for getting owned by getting milkshaked by a group of soy boys in the last Portland prayer rally that took place a month back. So Andy was on Fox News recently after the very successful Portland protest that occurred, where the counter protesters were able to push back on the white nationalists and white supremacists that were trying to organize in their community in the least violent, like almost non-violent fashion completely, with like very little scuffles occurring throughout the city, very little. I would highly regard this as a success, but according to NGO, it wasn't.
Just over the weekend, there were only 13 or 14 arrests. There probably should have been 100 because some of these demonstrators, after the right-wingers already left, they just occupied the streets, and there was an injury that resulted from that with a bicyclist.
Well, turns out, that wasn't even related to the anti-fascist protests. It was just totally unrelated. The crash happened amid a protest downtown, but officials said it was not related to the demonstration. But Andy, of course, will seize on any opportunity he possibly can to make it seem like the left are the real violent ones, and oftentimes defend the actual violent ones, including the Proud Boy organization, which he says is just a simple drinking club, despite the fact that they themselves, or at least the founder, Gavin McGinnis, is very open about engaging in violence, in fisticuffs and whatnot. Now, the reason why Andy Ngo is our bootlicker of the week and wants everyone to tread on him is because he is an Asian homosexual man. And being an Asian homosexual man, he probably shouldn't be supporting white supremacists and trad cats and right-wing radicals, but it's okay. He is willing to tokenize himself and serve his white pals and his white nationalist pals who have a drastically different reorganization of society that they want to implement that would ironically make his existence illegal. But in the short term, makes a lot of money for him. So I guess he's going to keep licking those boots. Dan, do you have anything to add to this segment, or because you're hanging out back there?
Hey, professional, what was that?
What?
I'm sorry, professional, what was that?
What do you mean professional?
What was your question?
No, I said, do you have anything to add to Andy No? Like,
oh yeah, Andy No, Andy No. Yes, I do have a bunch of ads, of course.
Okay, go ahead.
God, like, so, once he was kicked off of, I guess, his claim to fame, because you always have to have a claim to fame, as being accepted by the right wing, specifically National Review and Quillette and those types. He basically posted this vehemently racist thing about another Muslim student at his school up in Portland State, somewhere around there. He got called out for that. He got fired from the school paper for posting this racist, completely inaccurate piece, turns around to the National Review and goes, "This is why I was silenced by the left." So, it's a game, it's a gimmick. It's the same thing Shapiro does, the same thing Dave Rubin does. Eventually, Andy No is going to be on Joe Rogan if he hasn't already, because he
was on Joe Rogan.
Exactly, that's part of the grift too. Like, I think with Andy No, though, we're reaching a peak where people are starting to see this playbook having been done so many times that he's not going to stand. And also, he's just like a complete dumbass. Like, he keeps writing these articles that are completely easily misprovable. He keeps stepping in shit. Even the whole milkshake thing that happened completely got blown out of proportion. And it turned out the police were going off of an unverified report, likely from a white nationalist, that the milkshakes were mixed with cement back at the previous Portland rally you were alluding to earlier. So he's just like a complete fucking mess, dude. Like,
yeah, but did you know that after he got fired, he got a job at the New York Post? He was on a beat. It was fake hate crimes. The beat that Andy was on was fake hate crimes, hate crime hoaxes. Sorry, I didn't know that was a literal beat on a newspaper.
It sounds like a podcast with Rachel Dolezal. Like, what do you even do with that beat?
Yeah, it's just hate crime hoaxes is what Andy spends most of his time uncovering, unless he is the victim of a potential hate crime, because obviously the milkshakes that he received was not because he had in the past doxed leftist activists and victims of white supremacist violence, and he has done this, but because he was a homosexual Asian man. Of course, that's a big tenet of anti-fascist mobilization is hating, Asian people who are gay. Idiot. Anyway, on that note, that is the final part of this Agit Prop episode number 4. I hope you guys enjoyed it. There was a double episode. We're not going to have one on Friday, and I still haven't figured out how to do a sign off. So you can find me on twitch.tv/Hasanabi, where I'm live every day for longer conversations with some of the guests that you saw here, including Mehdi Hasan, hopefully, and definitely Michael Brooks. And you can find me on Instagram at Hasan Piker and Twitter at Hasan the Hun. And you can find my breakdown videos on TYT on Facebook. So that is all for today. And see you next time. See you next week on next Tuesday. All right.